changed.
I have not changed my mind, but I really appreciate the White House folks coming over.
Joining us now for more is ABC's Mary Alice Parks from the White House. And Mary, we've heard many Democrats say that they want to wait and see how Biden handles tonight's press conference. Does the White House see this as make or break night for him?
Yeah, Lindsay, after that debate performance, the White House and the president's campaign said that it was just one bad night and that voters and Democratic officials should look to the days ahead and look for moments like this when the president would once again be unscripted and off the cuff. They pointed and really raised.
Cheers, everybody. Get your merch on the website, jd's2cents.com.
Officials calling for the president to step aside. So I can tell you that everyone here in Washington is closely watching this. The White House knows that every single word is going to be scrutinized.
Of course, people are going to be hanging on every word. And Mary Alice, we also know that congressional lawmakers are concerned. But who would you say is Biden's target audience with tonight's press conference?
I mean, really the voters. The president needs to
The X space is open, 720-72-cents, 720-72-cents. As well as, the live phone line, 720-72-cents. Call in live. Also, the X space is open right now on X. So head on over there if that's your preferred mode of chatting. I'm hanging out. I would love to hear your 2 cents. Cheers, everybody.
He is up for the job. He really knows that his audience is the American people. He needs to reassure them in his confidence and restore confidence in his abilities.
And the White House is, of course, pushing today's new economic numbers, increase in new jobs, lowering inflation. But it seems to all be getting lost still in the questions that remain about Biden's capacity, his acuity. Is that part of the main issue here, that the president is unable to amplify wins like these because potentially concerns over his capabilities continue to dog him?
Absolutely. And he hasn't been able to switch the conversation to Trump. For so long, the theory of the case from Democrats, from Biden's own team, has been that they can win this election if they, frankly, make the American people remember why they didn't like former President Trump, why they didn't give him a second term. The problem for the president now is that he hasn't been able to get past that debate performance, hasn't been able to bring the conversation back to one focused on Trump, or like you said, one where he's able to talk about his own accomplishments. Instead, they don't see, and Democrats tell me they are worried they don't see a path from the campaign out of this right now, how to switch the conversation beyond anything around, beyond the president's own sort of capabilities and abilities in this moment, Lindsay.
And we know the Democrats are, of course, being tight-lipped or either towing the party line in front of the camera. But what do your sources say that the discussions are like behind closed doors?
So much anxiety. I mean, I talked to one person who works for the party today who told me, and he was willing to go on the record as someone who works for the party. He said that this is a campaign that is paralyzed, that no one believes at this point that they can win. He said that members are not stupid. Members of Congress he was referring to are not stupid. If the campaign had real numbers to back up a pathway to re-election, they would come to the Hill and show everyone those numbers. But so far, we've heard from members of Congress themselves, they did not see much data presented from the campaign today. Look, the members of Congress are also talking to their voters, their constituents, the people that they represent, and they are hearing over and over, they're telling us that they are hearing a real concern, even from Democratic-based voters, that the president should step aside. I mean, I think the crisis within the Democratic Party is real. It is being felt right now, and it really, like we've been talking about all day, raises the stakes for this press conference tonight.
Yeah, something that we have been talking about for days now is this crisis. Mary Alice Parks from the White House, we thank you so much. And now we want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, who reports in from the NATO summit today.
President Biden stood on a stage alone and faced reporters. Tonight.
Oh my gosh. We're already 35 minutes past schedule. They must really be pumping him up full of drugs. Or they're euthanizing him right now to come out and say the president just passed. I really hope that doesn't happen. Not because I think Biden isn't a piece of shit, but because of just the chaos it's going to throw our country into. I mean, it's not even close to chaotic yet, and that would just be devastating. And the Democrats would be able to use him as a martyr, which gleans more votes for them in November. And fuck that, because we can't last 4 more years of this garbage.
Win again.
And our national poll shows even after that disastrous debate, the president remains locked in a dead heat with Trump, 46 to 47. But as pressure grows on Biden to drop out, tonight ABC News
46 to 47. Give me a fucking break. You guys are a joke.
would do if she were the one to take on Trump. With Biden under fire, Harris has been his relentless defender on the campaign trail, today appearing in battleground North Carolina.
Thanks to Joe Biden, if there is one single person who deserves credit in the world for strengthening NATO, making it stronger, making it more united and more effective, that is Joe Biden. That is Joe Biden.
And our new poll shows that in a head-to-head matchup with Trump, Harris actually fares slightly better than Biden, beating him 49 to 46.
Bullshit.
Comes just 24 hours after actor and Democratic mega donor George Clooney implored Biden to get out of the race.
You guys are so full of shit. Who is this? CBS, I think. ABC. ABC, you're full of shit.
Him to make that decision because time is running short.
Thanks to Mary Bruce for that. More than a dozen Democrats on the Hill are now publicly calling for President Biden to step aside. Today, officials from President Biden's campaign went to the Hill to meet with Senate Democrats. The meeting described at times as tense. Wasn't enough to convince them. Our senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott picks up the.
This is the tough press, by the way, that all the Democrats are bitching about right now. Can you imagine if they had to sit under the mainstream media scrutiny that we've endured ever since 2016 when Trump first came down the escalator, or 2015 when he first came down that golden escalator? Give me a break, you fucking libtards. What a bunch of crybabies.
The House of Representatives.
One senator describing the meeting as tense at times. We're told a number of lawmakers complained to the Biden team that they were being put in difficult, impossible, and untenable positions, having to defend the president's disastrous debate performance to their constituents back home. One senator telling ABC News, "I needed to see hard data that showed a path to success in November, and we did not get that."
Senator Whitehouse,
2 hours later, the meeting breaking up, the president's aides leaving, senators filtering out.
Some of my concerns are allayed. Some others have been deepened.
I spoke with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island as he was heading into the meeting.
Do you believe that President Biden is the best person to defeat Donald Trump in November?
I am going to hold off until we've had this conversation where they will discuss that exact point.
This was Senator Whitehouse after the meeting broke up.
How would you describe the meeting?
Cordial and constructive.
Constructive, okay, but not necessarily enough so far.
I'm not going to characterize it that way.
Peter Welch of Vermont is the only senator to openly call for the president to drop out. Writing in the Washington Post, "We have asked President Biden to do so much for so many for so long. It has required unmatched selflessness and courage. We need him to put us first, as he has done before." I asked him if today's meeting changed his mind.
I have not changed my mind, but I really appreciate the White House folks coming over.
West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin hinting the situation will come to a head this weekend.
I think everyone will be talking over Friday, Saturday, and by Sunday you should have some idea of what's going on.
To Rachel Scott for that. And we turn now to ABC News analyst and Politico senior Washington correspondent Rachel Bade. Rachel, thank you for joining us. So you're hearing from some Democrats tonight that they actually want Biden to have a bad night. Explain that.
Yeah, look, there's not a lot of them who are saying this, but some are telling me privately, yes, they feel like they have been in a nightmare.
Okay, guys, I'm going to switch over to my primary real quick. I just got to copy something over here for your live call-ins. Let's see, copy. That way, if you guys want to call in live, it'll feed into the OBS. And I noticed my chroma key here is messing up on my beard a little bit, so I'll try to work on that too, because it looks like shit.
The thought is, if he has a bad night tonight, it will sort of unify the party, and they'll easily be able to sort of put all this behind them. Biden will sort of force himself out. It's interesting, you know, just a couple of hours ago, Biden had this flub on the stage when he was up there with President Zelensky. He accidentally called him Putin. And I reached out to one longtime, very senior House Democratic aide. I asked, well, what do you think about that? What do you make about it? And he said, I mean, it's going to set this town right. Again,
It's just a gaffe at this point. I mean, that's definitely not close to the shit he's done recently.
That they basically want to put this behind them.
And
still funny as shit, though.
Live shot of that high-stakes press conference that is about to begin in just minutes, capping off several days now that the president has spent with world leaders during the NATO summit. Obviously, it goes without saying that there's just so much riding on tonight's press conference. What are you going to be watching for in particular, Rachel?
Yeah, look, I'm going to be seeing which version of Joe Biden do we see tonight. Is it the Joe Biden who showed up on the debate stage, who couldn't finish, you know, a complete sentence, who had his sort of train of thought often, you know, go off and trail without making a complete argument or conclusion? Or is it the Joe Biden we saw when he sat down with George Stephanopoulos, which, you know, Democrats felt wasn't great, but it also wasn't as bad as the debate performance. So which version are we going to see tonight? But I got to say, Lindsay, I'm hearing from sources that it doesn't necessarily matter how well he does. He could have a perfect performance tonight. I have talked to Democrats who already have press releases drafted and ready to go, and they're going to be sending them either tonight or tomorrow. So look, that just tells you right there that you know what he does tonight, it doesn't matter. And when I say press releases, I mean press releases.
Get your merch, everyone. Follow the ticker above. JD's2cents.com. Call in live. Get this shirt. Get this awesome glass. Other merch available. Love you guys.
Yes, Nancy Pelosi, who is one of Joe Biden's top allies, who over the years has become very good friends with him, helped him pass the legislation that would become the cornerstone of his legacy. She was the one who, behind the scenes, talked to members and said, look, you've got to represent.
Over under, everyone. How many minutes does he speak? Over under.
That. Her one request was wait until after the NATO summit is.
Another over under. How many questions does he take?
Some members start to trickle out, but again, there's going to be more members who potentially come out tonight and tomorrow.
And we've also heard.
One last over under. How many minutes is he on stage total?
Too. This is not unusual for people to have a bad night, but now it sounds like he may, in addition to Nancy Pelosi, be playing some kind of role behind the scenes. What are your sources telling you?
Yeah, really fascinating. I mean, George Clooney, famous actor, Democratic donor, wrote this op-ed that sort of shocked everyone yesterday, where he said, I love Joe Biden. He's done a great job as president. But look, what you saw on the debate stage a couple of weeks ago, that's the Joe Biden I've seen up close and personal. And I've talked to all these members of Congress, all these Democratic leaders. Everybody agrees he has to go, or they're going to lose the White House. Democrats will lose the White House, and they'll lose the Congress.
Damn.
George Clooney, before he actually penned that op-ed, he actually consulted.
That is ABC saying that on the air. Wow.
Biden just a few weeks ago, where people felt Biden was really struggling and not basically showing that he was having trouble like keeping up with everyone. So Barack Obama did not advise him against writing this op-ed. He sort of, you know, allowed his friend to do this. And so that's just one example where Barack Obama, clearly a powerful person, he's close with George Clooney, he could have advised him not to run this. He could have said, look, this is bad for the party, we got to stick with Joe Biden. He didn't. And that's what's going on with Nancy Pelosi. It's what's going on with Chuck Schumer in the Senate. And it's what's going on with Hakeem Jeffries in the House. All these leaders, members look to them for messaging guidance. You know, if they were out there saying, you know, Joe Biden's our guy, everyone needs to stop, you know, undercutting him. What you're seeing right now, it's not as bad as what perhaps you think it is. If they were working behind the scenes to keep Democrats in line, that would be one thing, but none of.
Looks like we're gearing up here for fucktard.
To push Joe Biden out. It's important to note that in George Stephanopoulos'
I need to grab another beer. Be right back.
point blank, what would you do if Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, and Chuck Schumer came to you and said, step aside? He wouldn't answer that question, Lindsay. And there's a reason he wouldn't answer that question, because that would be a really tough thing for Biden to ignore. And yet it looks like increasingly we are reaching a moment like that.
And I know, Rachel, at this point I'm asking you to read tea leaves here, and I guess that's a little bit what political punditry is, but you have the added benefit of having some close sources there. But one thing that you said really I thought was very interesting, in that it really doesn't matter if he's perfection tonight. If this speech is flawless, it sounds like that is not going to be enough. And really, I guess, so my question is, initially I was going to say,
you know, speaking of what they're speaking of, Charlie Kirk put it really well today. If Biden was smart and he didn't have such a debilitating ego, even in his senility, he would just go up to where do they vacation? Camp David, and he would just sit there until the deadline passes for his confirmation or nomination for Democratic president. I can't talk right now. I'm having a Biden moment.
Influence.
I think you all know what I'm trying to say, though. If he went and sat at Camp David today, or not today, but past the 15th of July, I think, the Democrats couldn't do anything under their rules at that point to remove him from the running for his second term.
Much has been switched, Lindsay, and it does feel like it's a matter of time.
All right, Rachel Bade, we're going to ask you just to stand by for a moment and bring back in.
They just keep hitting him. They're over him. The media, he has lost the media, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Biden has lost the mainstream media, which is his biggest weapon by far. And this is horse shit. Give me a break. You guys are so full of shit. Even though Joe Biden's lost the media, they're just so full of shit, man. Still. You guys are shameless. What a joke.
Himself during his campaign events and stump speeches is focusing more on the vice president, but it is very interesting and very telling in this moment that they are spending time and dollars investing in this kind of polling. Look, Democrats that I've talked to also say that in some hypothetical situation where the president were to step aside, the cleanest, easiest path forward would be if he directed all of his delegates to just support the vice president to try to avoid a big open brokered convention. Now, some Democrats still think that that would be good. It'd be healthy for the party to have kind of the frenzy of it, the craziness of it, that could be some healing in the chaos. But others say that the real straightforward, the most rational path would be for the president to just pass the torch to the vice president. But, you know, to Rachel's point, they all also concede that this is a decision that the president is going to make. He's going to make it with a very small circle of advisors. In fact, that is something that many Democrats have lamented about. They feel like the president's inner circle is small and growing even smaller, and that this is just an incredibly personal decision that he is going to have to make with his family. You know, it is worth noting here that he says he has already made this decision, right? He has been emphatic that he is staying in this race. We heard him tell George Stephanopoulos it would be the Lord Almighty would need to tell him that he can't win and that he needs to back out. But we have continued to hear from Democrats on Capitol Hill. Of course, we've talked a lot about those comments from Nancy Pelosi that suggest there is still some wiggle room here, some moment where the president could still change his mind. And, of course, the growing question about how he would handle a moment if more and more elected members of his own party call for him to step aside.
We're continuing to see increased activity there as we await the president to address the group that is assembled and the nation and really world that's going to be listening to him tonight. You know, Mary Alice, you have to be a fly on the wall as part of the Trump campaign. now potentially preparing that this may not be, that Biden may not be the nominee in the fall. It was interesting to see former President Trump say today that he's the guy that we've prepared for. And so it'll be interesting to see how they spend the next few days as they're preparing now for the Republican National Convention.
Trump will have no problem handling whatever garbage they spew out of their disgusting commie crap mouths.
Democrats are aware of this messaging from the Trump campaign that Biden, in their minds, is a weaker candidate. But I'm thinking again just about this week, about.
How is he not a weaker candidate? He's a fucking mummy, for Christ's sakes. Kamala Harris will have more points than Joe Biden. It doesn't take a fucking rocket scientist to figure that out.
Voters that were not interested in voting for former President Trump. Some of those Nikki Haley style.
This is the contempt the mainstream media has for you guys. This is how stupid they think you are. And a lot of you are. Out there, not just on the left, but on the right as well. Sitting there sipping on your Fox News as well is just as bad. If you have a cult of personality for the mainstream media, and including Fox on the right, or Newsmax, or any of that, think for yourselves. Do not listen to these fucking clowns. They're bought and paid for, all of them. Sean Hannity's one of the biggest ones. I can't stand that motherfucker.
Mary Alice, I want to bring you the same question of the conversation that we talked about with Rachel Bade, and that is tonight's performance almost a moot point? Is it, even if it's flawless, would it be potentially too much, too little, too late for many of the donors and the head honchos of the Democratic Party?
Look, I think that there's a big party that we're talking about at many different levels here. We're talking
9 minutes to 1 hour late, and they already bumped it back an hour, so almost 2 hours late from the start of the day. And I hear what people are going to say. Oh, well, Trump was an hour late for his Doral, rally, 1 hour late. That was because the sun was still up. I could see it. And it would be right in his face, and it was hot as hell. So they delayed it last minute because of that. Someone should have looked at what time sunset was and set it up ahead of time. I totally agree. But, you know what? It's not even a comparison. This is indoors. So what's his fucking excuse? I really hope they're not euthanizing him right now. I really hope they're not. It will not surprise me if the Democrats, the leadership in place, stick a needle in his arm at some point and then pass it off as, oh, he passed away. It would be stupid to do it during waking hours. They would be smart to do it in the middle of the night when he's asleep. I hope that doesn't happen. And not because I have any love whatsoever for Joe Biden. He's a fucking pedophile. He's a disgusting human being. He always has been. And the only reason I don't want it to happen is because the Democrats will garner martyrdom votes in November. And we cannot have another 4 years of this Marxist commie crap bullshit.
At that concert at the White House. And now I spoke with a number of attendees, lawmakers, a former White House Obama official who were at that event and are now saying that they did have concerns after seeing the president up close and personal at that event. One lawmaker ultimately said it was that event coupled with the debate that led him to come out and call for President Biden to step aside. He was one of the first to do so, Lindsay, and what he said was that because he had seen essentially Biden 2 times looking worrisome to him, he felt that he could not, believe that.
Anyone else think it's funny that he looks just like the puppet Walter now? Even though the puppet Walter existed far before Dementia Biden existed?
and Will Staken, who did this reporting, that she had seen Biden 4 times in person over the past year and had noticed that decline. She was so concerned at one point, Lindsay, she said she privately raised concerns to White House staffers, joking with them that they had to, quote, keep Biden stitched together until November. So really just some fascinating new reporting on how there potentially were some concerns, how Biden potentially was not looking so great even before the debate, and how that is shaking out now, Lindsay.
And this obviously goes to the belief among some that the debate was not an isolated event, although the president says it was. Do you think that tonight, potentially having one good night is able to counter potentially one bad night?
Well, you've heard from those that have been chasing around lawmakers, all week, that potentially it will not be enough. But it does seem, Lindsay, that every single time someone comes out to say, hey, I've seen President Biden up close and personal, and he is the man that we saw on the debate, it has not gone well for them. Think about the op-ed from George Clooney. He said that the Biden at the debate was the Biden at the fundraiser that he hosted weeks ago. Now you have multiple attendees at the White House, lawmakers. Like I said, a former Obama White House official telling me the Biden that they saw just 2 weeks before the debate was the Biden they saw at the debate. So it is the same idea that it is not one bad night, Lindsay.
A critical time for President Biden, his presidency and his campaign, and another potential make or break moment. The president is about to hold his first full news conference in 8 months amid growing pressure from some members within his own party to withdraw from the race against Donald Trump. President Biden will be live here.
Does that not look like Biden right now? The funny thing about this, Biden didn't always look like this, and Walter has been a puppet. I forget the guy's name who is his whole act, but man, it looks just like him. It's fucking hilarious.
Earlier today, the president's top campaign aides went to Capitol Hill to meet with Senate Democrats behind closed doors, trying to ease their concerns despite the turmoil of the last 2 weeks and the debate.
Coming up on 1 hour late. God, what a joke.
47, Biden 46. The poll also shows Vice President Kamala Harris doing slightly better in a hypothetical matchup against Trump. Harris 49, Trump 46. The president set to take questions live. Again, an unscripted moment for him. Mary Bruce, you're in that room and you know how rare this is.
Again, don't even believe these polls. They're a joke.
He is under an intense microscope here tonight. The president well aware of that, David.
Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent, as we continue to watch this room. Reporters in the room who are gathered now standing along with others. And here comes President Biden after the NATO summit in Washington. Let's listen.
Here we go, guys.
Thank you. Please be seated. Well, good evening. We just concluded this year's NATO summit, and the consensus among the members was it was a great success. It's especially momentous because it represented the 75th year, the most important military defense alliance in the world's history of the world. We should never forget that NATO grew out of the wreckage of World War II, the most destructive war in history. The idea was to create an alliance of free and democratic nations that would commit themselves to a compact of collective defense. Standing together, they knew we'd all be safer. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. And it's worked because a would-be aggressor knows if they attack one of us, they'll be attacked by all of us. Sending that message is the best way to deter aggression and prevent wars in the first place. For those who thought NATO's time had passed, they got a rude awakening when Putin invaded Ukraine. Some of the oldest and deepest fears in Europe roared back to life because once again, a murderous madman was on the march. But this time, no one cowered in appeasement, especially the United States. We collected intelligence that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine months before the invasion. I directed the intelligence community to be a significant amount of intelligence be declassified so I could start building an international coalition to oppose the invasion. Then in February, some of you remember, I warned the world that the invasion was imminent. I rallied a coalition of 50 nations from Europe to Asia, to help Ukraine defend itself. Many foreign policy experts thought, as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, but Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, backed by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today, Kyiv still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been. During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statements to thank the United States and to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. NATO is not only stronger, NATO is bigger because we led the charge to bring in Finland and Sweden into the alliance, and it makes a gigantic difference. Excuse me. Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius. It was wonderful. Some of you forgot that, but that's exactly what he said. But I made it clear, a strong NATO is essential to American security. And I believe the obligation of Article 5 is sacred. And I would remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than a political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know the answer to all those questions is yes. And I believe the American people understand that America is stronger because of our alliances. I believe the American consensus from Truman to Reagan to me still holds today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must lead the world. We're an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote. Now let me turn to three other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further. Meanwhile, Trump's calling for a 10% tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables, and other necessities. And economists tell us that that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month. As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months, the United States has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council the G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close. We're making progress. The trend is positive, and I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America. We are the indispensable nation. Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. With that, I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one, the fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We've got more work to finish. There's so much, we've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million, I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down. And so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about your, you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. Officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is, well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time, and find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one. Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. That under my plan so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me an mainstream economist who said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic, doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase in corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better. And we talk about how, for example, remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States? Used to be 40% of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry was in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there and import what the product was. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to Europe, to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world, and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming into being. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies all through. And by the way, red states and blue states. Matter of fact, there's as much in red states as blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fairer. Like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well. But the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her. Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. The presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many, don't hold me to, roughly 20 major events. Some with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway, I'm sorry. Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten him more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is working. I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
bad nights, sir? How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. What I got here? Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO, or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine, that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva, and he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine, as you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. No, that's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? In my office. I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help? And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so Finland joined NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they were already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe, I can't recall whether he said it publicly in our closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind it being repeated. He said, we decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. We were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it. We're just going to get stronger. David Sanger. Where's it?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do, what they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating. They're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we cannot, you have to make clear, China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between Xi and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure that Xi understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. Want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules, and you don't have the authority, and you have to provide all access to all the data and information you have. There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules. For example, the idea they don't abide by the international rules related to subsidizing products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have both China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Interrupt that impact?
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them in, as a consequence of that, their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked a lot about is that, and I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it. But we need a new industrial policy in the West. For example, we talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity, has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to, it came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry, new everything from vehicles to weapon systems. And so one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of the West, particularly in Europe and Japan, to be able to generate the kind of ability to produce their own weapon systems. Not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same, it's what Russia's trying to figure out. That they went to China and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to, the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need. That was a discussion as well.
Mr. President, I'm not sure you answered on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. And, but there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way, I think, don't hold me to the exact number, but I think that Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they've conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life, but they've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there. They've got a problem. But what they do have control of is they are very good at controlling and running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate with people. They lie like hell to the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anyone else has. We just put together with, today I brought on, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice now, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target, and I don't take it lightly. Sam from NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asma Khalid with NPR. I have two questions. Earlier, you spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war, and I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back to when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative, number one. The Israeli War Cabinet, I've been dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. Some of the reporters around here come here all the time and heard me say this. The first time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her at her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well, and I support Israel. But this war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate in the transition so that they could keep the peace in Gaza without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel on the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port we attached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful. But that's why when I went to Israel immediately after the massacres that occurred at the hands of Hamas, the one thing I said to the Israelis, and I met with the War Cabinet and with Bibi, don't make the same mistake America made after bin Laden. There's no need to occupy anywhere. Go after the people who did the job. You may recall, I still get criticized for it, but I was totally opposed to the occupation and trying to unite Afghanistan. Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on, because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys, Sinwar and company. And all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed. I'm not providing them 2,000-pound bombs. They cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage. But remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. It sent an incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish I had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than most, there is a growing dissatisfaction on the West Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now. And so there's a lot of moving parts. I just have to keep moving to make sure that we get as much done as we can toward a ceasefire, and get those. And by the way, look at the numbers in Israel. I mean, my numbers are better in Israel than they are here. But then again, they're better than a lot of other people here too. But anyway.
Bridge candidacy in 2020. You referred to yourself as being a bridge candidate for a younger, fresher generation of Democratic leaders, and I wanted to know what changed.
What changed was the gravity of the situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division. And I think, I won't put words in anybody's mouth. Most presidential historians give me credit for having accomplished more than most any president since Johnson and maybe before that to get major pieces of legislation passed. And what I realized was my long time in the Senate had equipped me to have the wisdom to know how to deal with the Congress, to get things done. We got more major legislation passed that no one thought would happen. And I want to finish it, to get that finished. If tomorrow, if we had a circumstance where there was a lineup and I hadn't inherited what I did and we just moved things along, anyway, it's going to change.
Last question.
Haley Bull, Scripps. Or no, Josh Weingrove, I'm sorry, was the next one. I'll do 2 more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of your colleagues, Democrats on the Hill, are watching tonight as they assess what they want to say about your candidacy. I'm wondering how you're thinking of this right now. It seems like your answer is clear, but they're watching how things go tonight, tomorrow in Michigan, next week in Texas and Nevada. Are you thinking that way about whether how the next week or 2 goes would inform your...
Am I using that way, you said?
Are you thinking that way about how the next 2 weeks go? Will that affect your decision, or are you fully determined on running in November as the party's nominee?
I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there. Let me see them out, for the longest time it was, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin to North Carolina to demonstrate that I'm going out in the areas where we think we can win, where we can persuade people to move our way, or people are already there. And then look, the other thing is, we have the most extensive campaign organization of anybody's had in a long, long time. We have well over 1,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, making tens of thousands of phone calls. We have headquarters, I forget exactly how many, I don't want to cite a number and then find out I'm off, but we have scores of headquarters in all the toss-up states. We're organized, we're moving, and that's awful hard to replace in the near term. And here's the other thing. I was in the Senate a long time. Very proud of what I've done in the Senate. I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, and I was chairman or ranking member and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be going down to the Johnson Library. Anyway, I'm going to be going around making the case of the things that I think we have to finish and how we can't afford to lose what we've done or backslide on civil rights, civil liberties, women's rights. There's that little button we have. Control guns, not girls. I mean, the idea, we're sitting around, this is where Kamala's so good as well. We're sitting around, more children are killed by a bullet than any other cause of death. The United States of America. What the hell are we doing? What are we doing? We got a candidate saying, promise the NRA, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. You got a Supreme Court that is what you might call the most conservative court in American history. This is ridiculous. There's so much we can do still. And I'm determined to get it done. It's about freedom. And by the way, I'll end this. Well, I'm not going to do that. Haley has to come up too. But I remember I made a speech on democracy in Philadelphia at Independence Hall. And I'm not being critical, just observing. The bulk of the press, what the hell is he talking about that for? Democracy. You did. Democracy is not an issue. Democracy is not an issue. Except the polling data showed 60% of the people knew I was right, thought I was right. I'm not asking you a question. You don't have to answer, obviously. But do you think our democracy is under siege based on this court? Do you think democracy is under siege based on Project 2025? Do you think he means what he says when he says he's going to do away with the civil service, eliminate the Department of Education, make sure, we've never been here before. And that's the other reason why you say, hand off to another generation. I've got to finish this job. I've got to finish this job because there's so much at stake.
We've had some discussions over the past few days with your press secretary about the question of health exams. And you said you take a cognitive test every day in this job. Are you open to taking another physical or test before the election? Governor Whitmer of Michigan, for instance, said it wouldn't hurt to take a test.
Well, look, 2 things. One, I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. In each case, as recently as February. And they say I'm in good shape, okay? Although I do have a little problem with my left foot because it's not as sensitive because I broke my foot and didn't wear the boot. But I'm good. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. You talk to my staff, all of you talk to my staff. Sometimes my staff talks a lot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think you have them telling you that all the major ideas we've undertaken haven't been in part initiated by me. I remember when the staff and I said, I'm going to go to South Korea, we're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and Korea back together again after essentially having hostilities toward one another since the end of World War II. I'm going to move and see that we can expand it. You know, the only thing age does is help you with it, creates a little bit of wisdom if you pay attention. And so the point I'm making is, I think it's important that if the neurologist tells me he thinks I need another exam, and by the way, I've laid every bit of the record out. Hadn't hidden a thing. You ought to ask Trump for his, okay? I laid it all out. And every single day, I'm surrounded by good docs. If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again, I'll do it. But no one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied. Did you have 7 docs? Did you have 2? Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you? So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me I should have another neurological exam, I'll do it. But that's where I am. Haley Bull, Scripps.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis when it comes to support for Ukraine. Does that mean you have not closed the door on further considering lifting restrictions for U.S.-made weapons inside Russia? And if I may, your convention is coming up where your delegates are pledged to make you the official nominee. If they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I get overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Even if that means they vote for someone else?
Sure. Look, I'll end this with this. I served in the Senate a long time. I understand the impetus of candidates running for local office and whether they think the top if they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very, at least a purple, it was a red state when I started, in terms of where you now talk red and blue. I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of every candidate. If they think that, you know, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them, then they're going to run away. I get it. But so far, go and look at the polling data in their states. Look at the in-depth, and by the way, I think you'd all acknowledge, and you're all experts, I'm not being solicitous about the president, you're experts on this stuff. How accurate does anybody think the polls are these days? I can give you a series of polls where you have likely voters, me versus Trump, where I win all the time. When the unlikely voters vote, he wins sometimes. So bottom line is all the polling data right now, which I think is premature because the campaign really hasn't even started. I mean, it hadn't started in earnest yet. Most of the time, it doesn't start till after September, after Labor Day. So a lot can happen. But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, you know, we talk about, you know, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have any want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that. No poll says that. Mr. President. Okay. Thanks.
This ends tonight's press conference. Thanks, everybody. This concludes.
Respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
One more extraordinary moment in this presidential campaign, and then we say this often, and we can't overstate it, that every day in the spotlight is another critical test for President Biden in this election, having given the debate performance that he did that was so highly criticized afterwards, the moments during that debate. Obviously, a lot of criticism for the former President Donald Trump in that debate as well, but it's the president who must now make the case before the American people and in front of fellow Democrats that he is the best person to be the nominee for their party moving forward. He took questions from 10 reporters there, about 55 minutes or so, also gave comments right at the top. This was wide-ranging. He talked about the success of the NATO summit this week, inflation numbers coming down just today, the economy, how many jobs he's created, manufacturing jobs, microchips. He talked about China. He talked about Russia, Israel, the Gaza war, of course, the war in Ukraine, the situation with Vladimir Putin. Took a number of questions. He was asked about himself, and
he starts off with this gaffe.
I'm gonna show you how great I am. Last night I cut the light off in my bedroom, hit the switch, was in the bed before the room was dark. I'm gonna show you how great I am. Only last week I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick. I'm so mean I make medicine sick. I'm gonna show you how great I am.
What is happening, everyone? Wow, I can't believe he lasted that long, honestly. Got 2 minutes of my time here, so I'll make it quick. That was atrocious. He was doing okay in the first 10, 20 minutes, and then just a fucking train wreck. What a fucking train wreck. The media has definitely turned on old Joe. And, hey, Democrats, fuck you. How does it feel to be on the short end of the stick for once when it comes to the fucking media? I don't have a whole lot more to say because you all saw it in my chat the whole time. I was chatting because I'm a conservative. I am a traditionalist. Every time the president, he's not my president. I'll tell you that right now. Trump's been my president since 2016. He will continue. But I didn't want to be talking over him while he was completely embarrassing us as a nation on the world stage. NATO. What a joke. And I've had a lot of beers because he drives me to drink, I'm not gonna lie. Oh, what a fucking dipshit. God damn it. Forgive me, Lord. Shouldn't use your name in vain. Okay. Anyways, I think the space is still open. If anyone is here and you want to chat, I will chat. But if not, I'm going to head on out. I don't see anyone in the space. I have no calls. So, there it is. 30 minutes after the hour. Out of time. And this is the episode for tonight, guys. Like I said, you can tell. I'm, look at it. You know, got 4 cans here. Just on standby. Because I'm just so embarrassed for our country. The number one reason we're in this position is because we have turned our back on Almighty God. That's why. That's the fundamental reason. So, I'll do an episode on that exclusively coming up soon. But I always want to end on a good note. One of my favorite scriptures is when Jesus is talking about sparrows, the flowers, how he clothes them, how he takes care of them. Do not worry about tomorrow because tomorrow has enough worry of its own. Just worry about today and I got the rest. God is in charge. He's on the throne. It'll all be sorted out. And the good will win and the evil will lose. So just remember that. Rest in that. Have peace and joy in that. That 99.999% of things you worry about will never even happen. That, guys, cheers. Get the merch, the glass, the shirt I'm wearing. It's all on jds2cents.com. Love you, patriots. And fuck you, commie-crats. Have a wonderful evening. Cheers.